Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So, who holds the real power in your workplace? Whose voices are left unheard? And have you ever wondered why some people speak up while others stay quiet? Today, we're exploring the often unseen dynamics of power, voice, and silence in the workplace, how they shape everything from who gets credit to who stays in the shadow. Joining us today, we're delighted to invite the brilliant Dr. Mark Cole today. Mark is author, practitioner, researcher, and it's fair to say reflector, and he's here to challenge our thinking and help us understand some of these critical dynamics. Mark is the director of Radical OD, and he's a prolific author of 3 books, 2 authored with John Higgins, and he's currently got a 4th book on the way, which hopefully he'll give us a spoiler for today as well. The books that he's written are The Great Unheard at Work, Understanding Voice and Silence in Organizations, Leadership Unraveled and Exploring the Faulty Thinking Behind Modern Management, which challenges the underpinnings of what is corporate leadership. And he's also written Radical Organization Development, which critically examines current OD practice. Including this, he's also a practitioner and has extensive experience in senior roles in OD, leadership and learning across the healthcare sector, and he's also facilitated the NHS London Leadership Academy. You'll find links to his books, blog and website in the show notes today if you want to go further. He also has a doctorate, and his thesis looked at reflective practice, which is a fascinating area, and he also holds a PG certificate in organizational change management. So it's absolutely brilliant to have you join us today. Danny and I have been looking forward to this conversation all week long. It's great to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. It's been exciting to come opportunity to come and have a chat about some issues that it's just very exciting to get to articulate this stuff and to have conversations. I should just say, as an OD person, people might notice my voice is slightly strained. That's because I've developed a condition called spasmodic dysphonia, which is a fantastic term for something very simple, which is when I want my vocal cords to be open, they slap shut. And when I want them slapped shut, the bloody thing's open. So quality of my voice can be slightly hoarse on occasion. It can be a bit strangulated, but should be okay. I now manage my day. If I've got then this, I don't have it prior to it or after it. After it, I won't be able to say anything. So apologies if the quality of my voice is distracting, but I will endeavour to get the message across. And in the words of Alan Partridge, I really hope they don't take my chat away. But at the moment, I'm just about able to speak, so it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for explaining. We're delighted to have you with us. So just to kick us off, we'd really like to understand a bit more about the work that you do and why, you talked about that importance of that focus you've got on power and voice and silence in the workplace. Why is that the area you've ended up focusing on? Why is that so important?
When I had to think about this, I took some time to consider what was it that had pushed me into this space? Why was power so important? And it occurred to me, first, it was something in terms of my background. So family dynamics are always quite interesting. I had a dad who was lovable, but quite severe and quite withdrawn. So very often he would use silence as a way of communicating irritation about something. And obviously he was an extremely powerful figure in the family. So as a starting point, there was that. And then briefly I went to work with him. He was a window dresser. So I said to him, I could dress windows, cocky 20-year-old. I could dress windows. And he said, all right, and if you can, come and work. So we spent a year together working. And I was really surprised on one occasion because he was freelance. And he went to this shop in Bromley and stepped in. And he talked to the owner of the shop, who he used his title, Mr. So-and-so. We met Mr. So-and-so, and instantly Mr. So-and-so didn't call my dad John or Mr. Cole. He just called him Cole. Oh, please, you're here, Cole. Can you hear to the windows? I remember standing there thinking, you two are equal. Dad is a business person, you're a business person. Why do you get to call him Cole? he has to call you Mr. So-and-so. So these were kind of early problems to start to think about power, and I recognised it. And then throughout my first degree, I was fascinated by Karl Marx, as so many young people. And then I went to do my teacher training, and suddenly Marx didn't quite seem to fit what I was experiencing. So I started reading Michel Foucault. And once I started on Foucault, I thought, this is a far more nuanced approach to the idea of power, and it has far better application to circumstances like education and the workplace. So that was a major step as well. And then very often, certainly, I spent 25 years, perhaps 30 years of my career just being a corporate drone. So again, my dad's voice would say, just turn up, do what they take, and keep your head down. And that was the way I lived my life until I did go across to work at Leadership Academy, as Gary mentioned, and suddenly I was given space, not just to do interesting things, but to think about, which is so rare in corporate settings, the space to think, the time to take the opportunity to think. And I started to think critically about the workplace, and particularly about my work. And I kind of thought, am I reinforcing structures of power by some of my own practice? Which is what prompted me to write a book called Radical Organization Development. And I remember writing a chunky chapter that was intensely critical. And I thought, this is turning out as an 85,000 word resignation letter. So I need to have a chunky back chapter that says, what do I want to do differently? So I didn't want to say to people, here is a model of a practice. I wanted to say, here's what I intend to do. And chief amongst that was 7 precepts. But 4 was start to talk about power. For me, the job of OD is, can you call out power? Can you spot it and say it's not?
And I think it's really interesting, isn't it, that you talked there about calling out power and spotting it. Do you think people in general in workplaces understand power and what it looks like and how it shows up?
No, I don't think so, because I think everyone gets the hierarchical stuff. So, you you look down, there are people you boss about, and you look up, there's the person who bosses you. It's a fairly crude picture. But that Foucauldian nature of thinking about it is something that I am the object of, so power acts on me, also acts through me, and just as a person and in conjunction, particularly as a group, power can present itself in that as well. And I guess the answer to the previous question is that being bullied, which is what I experienced at school, really brought hope that I'm powerless in this circumstance. Other people are exercising power over me. So when I moved into the workplace, I looked around and thought, there's a lot of bullying going on here. So power is quite at the forefront. So I think people are aware of hierarchy. I think we all sometimes struggle to recognise the power that we hold and the power that might exist in groups. There's that excellent book by Elias Canetti talking about crowds, and it makes the point the crowd is a fantastically powerful entity that we need to be very mindful of.
What are your thoughts on how we get to people to recognise they have got agency and power when they might feel powerless?
Yeah, because we had Ted Rao on here that is part of Sociocracy, and he makes a big point of power over, power under. And the way that he sort of describes it is that people actually with power under may feel that they're powerful, but they actually exercise a lot of power, but it just may not be in the traditional way that we would understand and describe power as well. So power comes in many different forms, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I think it's always useful to go back to Mary Parker Follett, who tends to be a forgotten person in terms of OD thinking, and I suspect she's forgotten because she's a woman. In crude terms, I think it's a gendered thing. Her rich source of writing, thinking tends to get ignored, but it was Follett herself who started to talk oh, who's got power? Who's got power within? Who's got power is, and all those different ways of thinking about it should encourage us to say, actually, yes, I have power. People that don't actually appear below me, the structures, but I have power over them. So it's it requires a reflective approach to say, okay, I could sit here and just look up the chat and say, power acting on me. But instead, I should probably look out and down across and say, how are people perceiving me in terms of acts of power? And I think that's important, because otherwise that traditional picture of power, some sort of zero-sum relationship where they have power, I don't have. That's just too crude a picture, because I can have it as well.
And you mentioned your 85,000 word resignation letter.
I did.
Which is great. Obviously, you've got extensive experience in the NHS, for example, which is a real interesting place about, because you've got different professions. You've got obviously the medical staff, you've got the management, you've got different levels, different professions all coming together in this one big melting pot, and then you've got a political agenda mixed in as well. What were some of the sort of the things that really sort of highlighted how power works in organisations from your time in the NHS?
In the NHS, it is perhaps the crudest manifestation of corporate power. So it is still dominated by command and control for a variety of reasons. So people talk about blue light management. So if you walk into an emergency department, you expect pace and pressure to demand that people are making quick decisions. It's clear who's in charge. And I used to joke that, if I'm having a heart attack and collapse in the corridors of the hospital where I work, I would really like the crash team to appear and somebody take charge quite quickly. I do not want them to sit around in a circle, a flip chart, and say, can we just brainstorm how to resuscitate this person? So it's contextual. The problem is that blue light mentality washes across the whole corporate entity. And it remains an intensely hierarchical organisation, so it clearly puts steps in place and talks constantly about those steps. So it's one of the few corporations in the world, I suspect, that pretty much exclusively talks about its rules, which is 1.2, 1.4 million, it goes up. Talks about the workforce in terms of just their pay grade. So you can hear people in the chairs just saying, where's the Baton 5? Who's seen the Baton 7? And you just think, these are people you're talking about? I remember in an organisation, recruited a lot of new nurses because we were desperate to get people up to the Central Health Trust, urgent stuff. And people even just kept saying, what's happening with the Band 5s? And in effect, we recruited 70 people coming fresh into the organisation. We didn't actually say to them, what do you see when you arrive? What are you picking up? What can we learn from your fresh up? We just said, oh, the Band 5s have come. Let's just drop them into the jobs and hope we get on with it. So the NHS does that as well. It just talks about its people in terms of where they sit in the paper. And then, as you say, it is made up of a lot of professions, most of which are getting hierarchical themselves. So if the culture of the corporation is hierarchical, if you drill down into the subcultures, they are hierarchical as well. So it reinforces itself. So power shows up pretty consistently in the NHS. It's almost impossible to get, but because of the nature of that, it's that much more difficult to challenge, because you think, if I open my mouth, the whole thing's going to crash down on top of me. And of course, this month is Speak Up Month. So hearing lots of organisations say, we're having a great time, we're doing such great work, Speak Up is wonderful. But if you go out into organisations and talk to people about their experience, there's still intense limitations on people's freedom to say what they're actually thinking, be heard in terms of what he said. So the NHS was was a unique place for me. Again, explains why power has become so important to my thinking.
I guess a question I'm just dying to ask about that. So obviously practicing organization development in an organization with sort of a power setup, like it's almost like countercultural. Therefore, OD by its very nature is radical in there because it is like it's humanistic and all the other values that underpin it as well. How was it to create these different types of spaces to get people to act in different ways? Obviously, there's the sort of the macro, what is it like? But obviously, there's obviously specifics. Every situation is different that you're in. But was there an openness to it, or did you constantly feel you're having to fight to get OD's new ways of working in there?
I think it's a constant fight in most corporate settings. So I've just completed a piece of work that's called OD in the NHS. We had a serious conversation, Higgins and I, chatting to practitioners, and he pivoted around 2 questions. First, what is it OD currently does in the NHS? What are you asked to do? And people said, in typical OD style, oh, well, a manager comes to me and says, can you fix the team? Or, as phrases, can you fix this dysfunction? Oh, and by the way, this is tacit. By the way, I'm part of that team. I'm not going to be involved in any work you do. So it's watching the commissioning manager send themselves to practice where you're actually stepping. And I'm quite critical of a lot of that activity because I'm conscious of some of the motivation I had for doing OD work, which was I always quite fancied being a game show host. And an OD kind of lets you be a light entertainer with a kind of serious edge. So these days I have to remind myself, it's not about me entertaining people. It's about me creating a space, a container review, and people can have a conversation, and I'm part of the conversation. And when I talk to people, the second question, first question was, what are you currently doing? The second question was, what could you be doing? We have this fantastic rich picture of OD in particular, some practice, as you said, that should be humanistic, democratic, looking to amplify voice as best it can. So people talking in practice about that. And I recall working in an organisation where occasionally into my calendar would drop disappointment from the chief exec, and I'd think, oh no, I'm going to be sacked. What have I done? I've spent my whole life thinking, what have I done? And that's probably down to my dad. But I'd go and see her, and I'd walk in, and she'd do the niceties, and I was thinking, get to the point. I know you're giving me the P45. And then she'd say, Mark, I need to know what's happening out there, by which she meant the organisation. And it just reminded me, oh yeah, OD is a really privileged practice, because if it's working, it gets to connect the organisation, and you get to go into paths that perhaps ordinarily you wouldn't visit. So there's a really connective quality to OD. And I think from the perspective of practitioners in the NHS, there are so many challenges presently and so much ambition for how the NHS should look. That's where he could be stepping in, but it would need to be working in a way that wasn't just, oh, we're going to set up an away day, and we'll have a terrible icebreaker, and we'll have to build towers using marshmallows and spaghetti. Yeah, that's kind of infant school or kindergarten. This is adults in the workplace. You start to have a serious adult conversation.
Yeah, I just want to take you back. So you said something there that often OD practitioners, and it happens whether we're internal practitioners or consultants, will have a commissioning manager or a leader saying, come in, fix the team, but I'm absenting myself from that. So there's something about OD practitioners having the confidence and finding the opportunity to speak up themselves and call that out. Have you got any advice or any reflections on that across the OD profession?
It's I suppose it's quite interesting because as I came to the end of my tenure, and prepared to take voluntary redundancy, my courage became more and more obvious. So in one instance, somebody commissioning a piece of work, quite a big piece of work, said, This particular group of NHS staff across London, they need leadership development. And most of the time I would have said, yes, of course, I'll go away and find some. This occasion, wait a minute, if the answer is leadership, are you sure you've asked the right question? Second, have you spoken to that in the scope population? So do you know what their needs are? I surprised myself because, as I said, I'd spent 25 years being pretty compliant in the workplace. This stuff came out of my mouth and I thought, oh, who said that? I thought, oh, it was me. And interestingly, people reacted quite well to it. So I'd silenced myself for years and years, thinking this will not land well. But actually, the People Commission wanted something like that. He thought they were interested to hear what people needs were, the group talking about. And the needs that came were significantly different to the umbrella to leadership development. They needed to think about the professional status, people could connect and take a more systemic. This is what they are articulating. So I think it's finding courage to professionally push back on things. So in the book called The Great, that's a tough word to say, The Great Unheard, John and I at how do you stay authentic to yourself and say what you need to say, but do it in a way that's acceptable socially. And we were agonizing about this because it's a tension, in the debate on free speech. That's always a critical element. And we ended up saying, oh no, we're going to have to draw a diagram because we tried to avoid diagrams, checklists, and other tools. And eventually John said, we'll have to do it right. And so we have a seesaw. On one side says, stay true to yourself, say what needs to be said. The other side is think about who you're speaking to, tailor your message, make sure your message is an invitation to dialogue, not a denunciation. And so just getting that balance right is a critical professional element as well for people. It's how do I articulate occupational concern in this place and offer a professional observation about how we might address it. So it has a second occasion as well where we're doing some inclusion. I said much the same thing. We're clear about the scope population, what they perceive their needs to be. And again, it was some focus groups. What came back as fascinating at traditional OD way. If you want to label that kind of activity as diagnostic, which I wouldn't, because actually that's OD, to get amongst people, start to talk about what's your experience of work? How could we make it better for you? Just getting in amongst people to have that conversation is to me the fundamental quality of OD, and then creating this connection and offering voice in terms of people further up. And that's where he could offer a massive contribution.
I think reading a blog you wrote recently, you talked about speaking up can actually be disempowering in contexts where nobody's listening or actively hearing what's said. And I think that's something we see a lot. You often get a leader who will say, why aren't my team talking to me? How do we help them navigate that?
Yeah, that's is complicated. It's partly it's manifold. So where to start for leaders in the current context, and no matter what we might say about leadership, you go through the Heathrow Academy, there are groaning shelves full of books talking about 57 varieties of leadership. There's servant leadership, transformational, every possible type. You step into the workplace, what you tend to see still is quite traditional, hence the fifth type of leadership. And I often say to groups, I'm of an age I still buy a daily newspaper, a hard copy. I've got the apps on my phone. It's not the same, particularly with failing eyesight. You think, I can't keep reading this on the iPhone. So if you go from front to back in the daily newspaper, you get a full sense of the cultural presence of leadership. So it starts with politics. It doesn't matter who it is, but it's all big leadership. It's people stepping into leadership. It's not leadership as a practice, it's leadership as a position. Business pages will do the same. It's all about entrepreneurs. And you get another article about some like Richard Branson or Elon Musk. And then you get to the back pages and it's full of Eric Ten Hag being dismissed from Man United because he can't deliver. But again, it's all models of heroic leadership. So that's the challenge that is to get people to think leadership. So that status of the leader's status very often feels quite fragile. So for many years, I was quite hostile towards senior leadership because I'd been a trade union rep in my 20s and an active member of the Labour Party. So as far as I was concerned, I was thinking, why are they? I remember not that long ago, I was being critical of a senior leader, and a friend said, "You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what it's like to have to occupy that position. You don't know what demands on them are. They may be interpreting those demands badly and dropping them down through the organisation in a clumsy way, but you have to take into account they could be sitting in the organisation under intense pressure. And as elections and Isabel Menzies-Leith talked about this, the organisation is a container for anxiety, and top teams are riven with anxiety. If you put it in that position, particularly if you think about top teams, the C-suite, as they like to say, which is such a cute way of talking about it. If you think about that C-suite, it's a quite competitive environment. So the idea of the chief exec is sitting there thinking, which one of these people is going to stab me in the back? Can I rely on any of these people? It's like a Shakespearean play. So I think it's a good position to be at that seniority. You feel like you have to performatively demonstrate what you're offering to justify a six-figure salary, which is why if you talk to senior, you have any potential to move from directive to connective, which is the fresh modelling of leadership. It's invariably no, it's my job to know the answer, to fix situations, and to tell people how to do it. No, it's not. That's a kind of traditional vision. It's not to do it. So once you're in that position, it's very awkward to then say, I'm going to do what you could use the phrase, I'm going to outsource my thinking, not to McKinsey or KPMG, which is what lots of senior leaders do. I'm going to outsource it to the workforce. Because then you think, well, if I'm doing that, why do I justify £100,000 a year? So there's a structural inhibition to saying to people, can you speak up? Can you tell me what you see, what you're thinking, and how things might be different? Because it feels too threatening in terms of the status and position. So the first step is to go back to leadership and rethink it. Literally, you have to take leadership apart and say that traditional picture of leadership is inhibiting improvement in organizational settings, and it means it very often means that the leader steps out of that space, apparently turns up at a town hall meeting, we call it, and invites people to speak. And that's a constant refrain. You want to hear from you. But realistically, people know as soon as they speak, the leader goes, interesting, bye. And that's the end of the conversation. And if you speak up, if you find the courage to speak up, and it's not acknowledged, nothing happens, that's an intensely destructive experience. That's what drives people into silence, which is why it feels particularly, that's what I talked about, as disempowering, because you feel like you seized power, but then you're the sense that the person above me actually just pushed me back in the box. Worse than that, they'll say, thank you, that's really helpful. But they won't actually mean it because it's all very theatrical. It's like a stage performance. You've got to step away from.
The senior leadership team is, like you sort of said, is such an interesting place to think about how we talk as organizations. And I guess potentially, is it somewhere that you see as an incredibly important place where OD can add value? Because when you actually sit in that senior leadership team room, it is a performance, isn't it? And there's very little free will in there in many respects, because all the anxieties that are holding people back and the power differentials. You've got people that are entering the room and their own teams are behind and saying, don't you dare come back with more work or say yes to that incentive. So the nature of conversation can't flow because people are so restricted. You've got the chief executive and all those things as well. What can OD do in those settings to sort of help bring more better talk and more listening and better communication in there.
I think that's a really good description of how it feels in the top of organisation. I remember chatting to an exec director. We're talking about taking a paper to the executive committee, and it was a complex paper that was quite a difficult message. And I'd written it for as the head of OD. We were then discussing it, and he said, "Well, the question is, who takes this to the committee?" And I thought, well, you're not throwing me up. So I said, I said, well, I think it's below my pay grade to take this to that level. And I said, besides that, that's your team. And he said, well, I don't think of them as my team. And that was a revelation to me, because I suddenly thought, well, they're the people you're working alongside all the time. They are the people you think of as your peers. You're actually saying, don't think of them as a team of which you are a member. I mean, a whole term T is contestable. It's not a term I like at all. I tend to critique it whenever I have opportunity. But I thought that was really illustrative. And if you think about what so many meetings in company settings are extremely performative. So gender tells us what's covered. There's an agreed outcome. And we turn up and we know what the script is. It's a tacit script. Okay, I'll wait until they've said something and then I'll make a contribution and we can finish because we'll get to the point to get to. So it's crudely performative. Whereas you think to yourself, what if people just came together and had a conversation? Because that's such an act thing to do. And it's something outside of the corporate setting we tend to do regularly. You think about social occasions, the occasions where you rub against people, chatting to them, you think, oh, you're interesting. Well, that's interesting. I don't think any formal meeting I've been to across the period of my career where I've come out thinking, that was interesting. I've just been looking at my watch thinking, when does this hell finish? So there's something about OD saying to that top team, do you have space for a conversation? And there's a problem there because one of the facets of contemporary leadership, or the way in which people think about leadership, enforce it, is, well, I'm a leader, I'm top of the part, doing this, and look how busy I am. And I caught somebody showing their calendar saying, I've got meetings from 8 till 8. When am I meant to do the work? And I said, oh, surely some of those meetings are the work. Also, you're an executive director. So if you can't control your own diary, can you control the organisation? And so it's a challenge about pace and busyness, because again, as a senior, you seem to be driving pace constantly, whereas actually OD is saying you need to take an hour just to sit and talk to one another, and that's a challenge in contemporary context to get people to take that seriously.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's just an hour. It's not a 3-day away day in an expensive hotel. It's just an hour, isn't it, as well? Well, I have to say, you're very good at having conversations, because this is the longest we've ever spent on our first questions.
Yes.
It's really good. So good to take a break. The next question to ask is what was your journey into OD? You kind of sort of talked at a high level in terms of what your journey was like, but how did you find sort of OD, and how did it transform your view? Like you said, it sort of spent your whole career being like X, and all of a sudden you found it and it became like Y. What was your journey into it?
Well, I left school early. I had an undistinguished school career. That's a polite way of putting it. That's not what my former teacher would have described it as. The only thing school taught me was that I was stupid. That was school's key teaching. And as I said, it's a quite heavy period of bullying in secondary school, which meant that I applied myself to truanting for the whole final year of my secondary career, and I was really good at it. So I don't think I attended at all across most of that fifth form. Used to go. So I was keen to get free of school as quickly as possible. Did a series of jobs then, shop assistant and was my dad picked me up from school that day, took me straight to the job centre and said, "We need to find you a job." So, okay, so I was shop assistant, and then I worked with Dad as a window dresser, and then I landed a job in NHS, which was operating part, is supporting people, moving patients and stuff like that. It was a great job, and it was communal. It's a fantastic for people to work with. Is again, first exposure, practicalities of workplace power. So I remember being scolded by the theatre sister because I turned up in a pair of scrubs, green, whereas as a porter I was meant to wear grey, and obviously I wouldn't wear blue because that was nurse's colour. But I got torn off a strip for wearing green, but there were no other scrubs to wear. So I did say to her, "But sister, there's no other scrubs." I had to, "No, you can't. They're the surgeons." And I thought, really? And just a second story. Went in, called into theatre one day. A particularly severe general surgeon was working. And I stepped in, buzzed in, and said, "Can I help?" And instead of turning to me, he looked to the scrub and said, "Tell him to move the light." And I thought, okay, so I stood up and moved the light, and I said, "Is that okay?" "Tell him it's okay." And the nurse had to tell me it was okay. So if you wanted a practical example of how voice and silence and power manifests itself in a workplace, that was definitely the case. I did rather enjoy on my last day accidentally banging his head with the light, which didn't, he wasn't working on a patient, just happened to be standing under it, and I had to apologise profusely whilst inside thinking, yes, gotcha, which is not a healthy position to take. So NHS was fascinating to me, and as I said, I became a trade union rep, and then thought, perhaps school got it wrong. Maybe I'm not stupid. Went back to college, course of Middlesex Polytechnic, which was industrial relations and trade union studies, which was a fantastic program, which of course doesn't exist anymore. And then matriculated to university and finally did teacher training. I did post-compulsory teacher training and thought, I'm not going to do this, because again, power was at the forefront of my mind. I was thinking, why do I have the power in this space, and how do I devolve power to students? And I could reconcile that challenge at that time, and I found a job first in the NHS. They were advertising for this employment development, looking for West Lambeth Health Authority. It was externally funded. The job of the team was to look at Lambeth, Southwark, and Wandsworth as 3 boroughs that St Thomas's Hospital sits in, and try and work out why the travel to work pattern was from the donut of London. So most of the staff came in from Bromley, from Croydon, from Kingston. Very little recruitment from Southern and Wandsworth. So our job was to groups traditionally discriminated in the labour market, discriminated against in the labour market, and to try and open up job opportunities at St Thomas's Hospital. And that included my job, which was school college links, connecting schools and colleges. And a colleague of mine did work with disability agencies, which was actually the more interesting part of the work, because it was, the NHS is driven by the medical model, and its disability can sometimes be quite old-fashioned. So that stream is really powerful. So it started with employment development, and I kind of moved into a series of other NHS roles, looking at people development, L&D, and started moving to leadership development, and then OD. And it's always been in and around health and social care, and that got me to joining the Leadership Academy. Of course, struggling free from salary life, becoming a freelancer.
What do you enjoy most about OD and working in the field?
This is going to sound cliche and glib, but it is the conversations. So I reflected on the pandemic, lockdown during the pandemic. I was thinking, because I had terrible anxiety during that period, it was clinically diagnosed. I didn't mind lockdown because I thought, good, it saves me the bother of going out there and feeling threatened by a terrible illness. So that was quite interesting. But on reflection, what I missed was just passing the time of day with people. So that, you're wandering along, you bump into someone, you're not going to be busy mates, but you are going to have a conversation about their life and your life in some micro form. And just that exchange makes me think that's so distinctly human that it's vital to preserve it. And if you extrapolate and say, if I bring people together, create a space where people can come together to have a conversation, that is such a rich source for me in terms of developing my understanding, in a sense, of what people's experiences are. And it's when John and I wrote great, that is a tough word. Great is obviously those two vowels together. There's a struggle to say. When we wrote the great unheard, we collected about 100 surveys that came back. I had data. 35 completed a free text section that talked about practical experiences of voice and silence. And we looked at them, and John, researcher, he said instantly, I'll take these away and codify them and see. And I said, no, let's not do that, because these are people's voices. So why would we want to condense them into a structured way of looking at it, which is just us? So at the end, we ended up putting 35 responses in the book, and we did a preamble about it, invited the reader to read those as voices from 35 people. Then I wrote a commentary and John commentary, and what was crucial there was just thinking methodologically. I want to hear the voices, and the more I hear voices, the more I think, God, that's really insightful, or it feels productive. It feels like a space where things can happen. And in the current circumstances, we face a whole range of wicked problems, not least stuff like climate change, crisis. That we need to move away from the idea that it's individual thinkers that solve the problem. And actually, it's collective intelligence that's required to really start to address some of these big issues. So the big motivation, big joy is coming off the end and thinking, gosh, I heard so much and I connected with human beings in such a rich way. I feel better for the experience. I feel more human for the experience.
You mentioned earlier that a little bit of the role of an OD is a little bit like a game show, because there is, and sometimes there's a certain amount of pressure that goes with giving them cathartic moments, isn't it? And
Yep.
change happens in the conversation. That's, people exchange views, their mental models are challenged and all types of things as well. Can change happen without the cathartic moment? Can it just happen through regular conversation? Does it always have to be spectacular?
I think it does. I think it happens in all manners. So one story I tell, doing a bit of work during the pandemic, talking to staff experiences. And I recall talking to a clinical member of staff, and they said when the pandemic hit, it was quite interesting because senior leadership kind of disappeared because they were struggling to try to work out what they needed to do. That person said, I saw more of my manager, so they were on the floor. But she said, really interesting thing was, if I needed to make a patient transfer, it would take me 3 days, and I would probably have to invoke somebody from upstairs to intervene to make it happen. So 3 days at a minimum. She said, since the crisis, I pick up the phone and speak to a colleague in another trust, I can get a patient transferred in half a day. And it just reminded you, it's that thing about Carl Weick's observation about organising an organisation. So once you start organising, you've got people coming together, shared ambition to get stuff done in an effective way. As they get on with it, gradually there's a bureaucratisation as the organisation springs up and surrounds it, and suddenly you need a finance function, HR function. And instead of them being in service of the organising, they become the dominant voices. So it's a reminder that organising bit is interesting bit. And I also back to Harold Bridger's work. So Bridger was Alfred Bion about kind of psychodynamics in groups, and he talks about most organizations are fixated on their primary task, which is what's the business for, what is it, how does it, whereas double task, which it talks about, is how do people connect to get that stuff done, and very often that connection is the interesting bit, and that's where little bits of change happen. And the job of OD sometimes is just calling it out and saying, have you seen how that's being done differently? Inviting people to talk about what the process was that got them to that point. Because again, there's a danger of thinking of pilots because the pilot works because people invested time in it. So it may not be transferred. So there's something about just saying to people, yes, you have the opportunity to look around, and he has the capacity to amplify that and just say there's little bits of change going. Sometimes connect in like a dot to dot. Sometimes they're just separate. Dave Snowden, who does so much work on complexity, he talks about safe to fail experiments and the job of somebody in a leadership position to fan those working well and allow those working well to just die. I think part of that is what OD needs to do as well, and it just needs to articulate that success might exist.
You mentioned obviously that creating and being a part of the conversation is what you enjoy the most, but what do you find most challenging?
Just getting people to accept that sitting in the room having a chat could be productive, because we're so taught that we need to put post-it notes on a flip chart and we need to do this or that. You forget just having a conversation with someone can generate change. So again, I remember a session I set up, and it was quite an old-fashioned session I was running, so it's not something I'm terribly proud of. But I set the group off and said, right, go and find a pair to talk about your work and share their work and see if there are ways in which your work intersects. And two in particular, one I think was a radiologist, the other was a clinical coder. So they structured the organization, they barely met, there was kind of dotted line in terms of flow of artifacts, but for the first time, face to face. And I think about 5 or 10 minutes, it was probably some silly icebreaker up. He turned around and said, I think we've just solved a major problem. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, I've worked out what I need for this process. He's just described what he needs. And we've worked out a solution. And I thought, well, there it is. That's how it happens. Just that quick exchange can generate significant shifts. And that's very positive.
And that's why OD charges the big dollars.
One question we like to ask is, when you look back at your career, what's the biggest lesson you think you've learned so far that you'd like to share with others?
I suppose there's that lesson about confidence. So having confidence to inhabit that role, to say that OD isn't just about dancing to the corporate tune. It's about staking a claim and talking differently and creating space for people to do stuff. So that's a critical observation I would make in terms of I wish I'd latched onto that quicker. But as with all things in life, you have to do it when time is right. So it came late, but the opportunity to benefit from that revelation now, which I hope I do.
Yeah, one question we like to ask is how do you invest in your own learning and development? What does that look like for you at this stage in your career?
So it's twofold, I guess. First, because I've talked so much about conversation, it's about paying attention. Because sometimes we lost in the routine of work. So I'm going to turn up at this time. This is going to happen. I'll take people through the program. Somehow, and happy sheets on the tray, and drown my sorrows in a gin and tonic. Which is kind of life of a desperate OD practitioner. But paying attention, say, I'm part of this, and learning from what you're hearing. So recognizing people are sharing their experiences, and those experiences are valuable because you're picking up on stuff that perhaps you wouldn't be privy to. So professional flows for me quite intimately from the practice of listening to others, particularly where others come together to talk. And the second bit it sounds, it doesn't sound quite right, but for me, business of writing stuff is really, really important. So, as I just described, when John and I are sorting through the methodology, thinking, how do we manage the 35 voices? It's simply off onto a tangent, thinking, oh, what's that? Because I found some reference on it to this practice called a state. A state was practice Max Weber picked up guilty, and literally a state is don't try and bring science to human interaction. You cannot scientize human interaction. You shouldn't be trying to interpret interaction between people. You should be hearing it, just hear. And that is a powerful, powerful thing to find. It's thought, oh yeah, that makes sense. And that kind of structure is quite a thing about. I'm not gonna do a particular session with you. I'm gonna just give opportunity to chat, and I will make sure, as John and I sometimes say, oh, I listen to hear, I hear to understand, and I understand to create space for done. If I can't, I'm not doing my job.
What advice would you give someone who's just at the foothills now of their OD career?
Okay, well, caution around the term career, because I was chatting to somebody about this week, and I said there are kind of two definitions. One is this kind of trajectory that takes you from point A to point B. I said, but it also can be applied to the ski slope because you're careering out of control. And most people's experience of work is a bit like that, careering out of control. Not in a bad way. It's a positive thing because it takes you into interesting places. And the person I was talking to said, oh, I've got a third. I said, what is it? She said, well, I feel like my career is sometimes spiraling. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I'm looking at a particular perspective and I move around it and zoom in on it, perhaps zoom back out. I thought, okay, that's a rich observation as well. So OD, I mean, there's quite a lot of discussion about OD being professionalized these days, which I think is an error. I think it's something to be actively avoided. It's an occupation that people, as you say, can come into, sometimes go out of. Sometimes people that don't even need the badge of OD are doing OD, and ultimately OD should be a feature of most managers' work. So you should have basic grounding in terms of thinking, what should I be doing with this team? Just bossing them around and dropping more work on them. It's or saying, speak up, which is another negative, of course. So I think there's something there, or just being cautious about that term, thinking, where is my interest? Or what really interests me in terms of corporate life? Where could I go to do stuff? In particular, if you've got interest in people, and by people I mean practical human beings, not human resources. If you're interested in people, then that's a logical space to step into. And simply you have to ask yourself, can I add value there? Because that's two sides. I'm interested. It's like a Venn diagram. Am I interested? Can I? If you find your slot and think, yeah, I can. And I guess the other thing I say is, this is a recommendation to quite a lot of people that John and I picked up, I think, in Leadership Unraveled. He said, ultimately, the critical practices for somebody proposing to be a leader, or in fact, for any individual, but very specifically thinking about leadership, is that maintain a level of criticality. So don't just look at the world as it is, look at it underneath its surface and its problems. Look at what voices are dominant, what voices are subaltern, how are things done and why are they done in that way. It's a bit like Jacques Derrida's notion of deconstruction. Look at this thing that's very familiar and you allow it to unravel in front of your eyes. You start to say, oh, I wasn't aware of that. If I just let it unpeel in front of me, I start to see things differently. So criticality is important. Reflexivity, so reflective practice is important. It can very often feel like an abstracted activity. So the person steps away from the experience if they can scientifically examine it as something in their hand. Whereas we all know in human existence, we can't just look at, because we're in the so we're part of it. It's a bit like that argument. You can't see the forest because you're standing on part of it. So it's a reminder that it's not just about reflection, reflexivity. The third end is just holding ethical self. So just reminding yourself, where are my ethics? So one of the things I say is that it's cost me a couple of jobs, I suspect. Is I loathe going to interviews now. Somebody says, these are our corporate values. How do you live them? And a couple of times in the interview, I've said, I'm not going to talk about your values, but I'm going to tell you about mine, because you need to know what gets me out in the morning to come and do my job, and what propels me to do my job well. And the really depressing thing is organizations spend so much time trying to foist quite glib values onto their organization. But rarely do they say to people as they arrive in the organization, what values do you bring? What values meant you wanted to come and work for this employer? And you're missing a trick, because that would create a set of values that are and constantly refreshing. So the ethical self is important as well. And finally, just as you step into it, make sure that your practice is exemplary, so that people look at you and think, what they're doing is really good. What they're doing is having an effect. What they're doing is living what they're saying. And there's a term in anarchist thought called prefiguration, which means that as you practice your politics, you make sure that how you try to achieve your goal is thought about in terms of, if I'm not cautious about that pursuit, will shape the outcome. So if I behave badly in the practice trying to get to the outcome, and you can think of Bolsheviks in 1917, to a negative outcome. If I'm mindful of what I'm trying to do, will create a positive carry through the practice into the outcome. So that's a critical thing as well for me.
Mark, I want to say a huge thank you for today. I've thoroughly enjoyed that. It's been a really expansive and immersive conversation. It's really shone a light on some of the most important parts of organization development. And I think no matter where you are in your career, or even if you're just looking in at what OD does, and I think it's a really powerful sort of set of answers you've given us today. So thank you. Danny, what are you taking away from today's conversation?
Gosh, where to start? I'm taking away a follow-up, so I'm going to go and investigate Mary Parker Follett. So I want to kind of explore her research and writings. A couple of questions. So I really loved what you said at the beginning about how might I be reinforcing the structures of power and having that as a kind of question. And I love the what do you do and what could you do? It's so simple, but I can imagine how powerful that is. And then I was just reflecting on the thing about the leadership paradigms, that the idea of a heroic leader and how that creates its own barriers to real conversation.
I love what you're saying about blue light mentality, because I think that's maybe not something even exclusive to the NHS, but it legitimizes a lot of behavior in organizations as not always healthy. But just being mindful of what that does. Also, that power is not necessarily something what's said, but it's embedded in so many things, even in the color of our outfits and the office that we have and the parking space and all those different things. And you have to open your eyes to it to really see it. And that sort of echoes the bit, which is just looking beneath the surface. Don't accept the world for what it is. Just take a sort of an observer's perspective and think what is actually going on and what are the structures and the patterns and the mental models that people are holding that are actually driving these things as well. So I'm going to have lots of thoughts based on this conversation. Mark, you've got such brilliant extensive work. There is a fourth book currently being, is it written or birthed? Is that the right word?
It's written. It is. It's a slog. It's a proper activity. Yes.
How can people follow your work? How can people follow your blogs or your writing or your all the different work that you do?
So, as you say, the books are out there, available through all good booksellers and Amazon, if you must. So that's where you can find them. John and I do quite a lot of work on a blog, which is pointing alongside. I can't point properly. So it's www.radicalod.org. That's a struggle I've got through him. That's where we go to blog about stuff and talk about whatever motivates us at that given time. So that's a good starting point. There's a website as well, which is www.markcolt.com. And as ever in instances like this kind of exchange has a beginning and end, but the end is also a beginning. So genuinely, if people have sat there thinking, I don't agree with that, or what's he said that for, or I quite like. I am open to people communicating, because part of my work these days is just to have conversations with people. So if someone pops up and says, "Oh, can we have a chat?" I always say yes, because again, it's conversation. So the address, what's the email address? The best one is Mark Cole OD, at outlook.com. So if you just want to have a chat or share some observations, just drop me a line, because as I say, it's the end of this session, the start of a conversation, if we choose it.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And all those details that Mark shared with you will be in the show notes as well. So please do follow those things. Absolutely fascinating. Mark's interview becomes, I think it's our 41st different practitioner from around the world. So this, from the last one, we were at New York. Now we're back to London, which is great. We're looking forward to whatever comes next. But power, silence, and those kind of were some of the things we really wanted to focus on. So this is a really glad addition to the brilliant portfolio of fantastic practitioners that have added to our collection. So if you've enjoyed this, please feel free to subscribe to the channel that you found it on, audio or on YouTube. We love it if you're able to like it, because it then pleases the algorithm gods and even more people will know about it. And then also finally, please leave a comment. We'd love to get your feedback. Obviously, Mark shared some brilliant perspectives there, and we'd love to hear what you're thinking about the things that Mark shared as well. So brilliant. So thank you so much. Again, thank you so much for your time, Mark. It's been a brilliant conversation. We've got so much from it, and it's going to be a pleasure to edit. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. It's been a pleasure.